Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Connect, Grow, Serve podcast, a podcast where two pastors talk about their faith and how they can experience their faith in daily life. Today, I'm with Pastor Mike, as I always am. Pastor Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. We are full on summer mode here in South Florida.
We sure are. It's horrible.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's pretty hot, especially today. It's pretty hot out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, but you know, it's great. Kids are out of school.
Yes.
It took about 2.5 days before we started getting comments about being bored and what am I going to do and all this kind of stuff. But thankfully, my older kids are in a sports camp this week, so that's keeping them busy, giving them something to do.
Yeah, I mean, man, 2 days before you're bored. I can't remember the last time I had to just sit around and do nothing, you know?
I know. It's crazy how much your perspective goes completely the other direction when you're a grown-up.
Yeah, yeah. I remember, though. I remember when I was a kid feeling bored.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's great.
Yeah. How are you and your family doing?
Yeah, we're doing all right. We are, you know, our youngest, our only, is very young. So life hasn't changed for us, really. He's in daycare, so he's still in daycare. My wife works full-time, and so do I. So, basically the biggest thing that's changed at our house is that our dog just does not want to go outside anymore. So we drag her out for 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the middle of the day, and 5 minutes in the evening, but it's just so hot. Yeah. She's a Great Pyrenees, so she's just massive and furry. You've seen her. Yeah. But so, yeah, the heat is not our friend.
Right.
But
yeah,
I mean, we're spending time outside playing with water and a pool and whatever, and it works out.
Yeah. Makes you realize why so many people here in Florida have their own pool. Cause it's just so helpful this time of year, especially. You just go out in the backyard, jump in the pool.
Yeah. So. And it totally makes me understand why people want to, snowbird, like get out of here in the summer.
Right.
Like, absolutely. I get it, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, so today's really interesting. It's going to be a really fun thing we're doing today. And it's just kind of this Ask Pastors podcast that we're going to do. And it's going to be some questions that we've received from some people and a few that we've got in. And I think it would be fun for us to just kind of share our own experiences and answer these questions and go back and forth on that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. You know, we just finished up a big sermon series, so we figured we'd do something a little different this week and kind of just share some of our own experiences and perspectives. And yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah. So to get right into it, without further ado, interesting question. I don't know that I've actually heard this answer from you, so I'm excited to ask it. When did you decide to become a pastor? What was the circumstance there?
Yeah, well, the shortest response I can give is that I don't know if I ever decided to become a pastor specifically, right? But I've shared some of this story in church here over the years, some different pieces of God's calling on my life. I've shared that in different sermons and group settings and stuff, but I guess the shortest version is, I grew up in a Christian home, grew up from a young age trusting Jesus as my Savior. But it wasn't until I got older that it really became more personal for me and a more serious commitment.
Yeah.
And so I was 17 years old. I was near the end of high school, and I just remember having this really strong sense of God saying, hey, are you ready to be serious about this?
Yeah.
Are you ready to be serious about your faith? And are you ready to give your life to serving me? And by the grace of Christ, I said yes. And so from there on, I knew that, God was leading me into ministry. I didn't know the specifics. I didn't know exactly what that looked like. Even at 17 years old, I sort of had a guess that I would probably end up working at a church someday, like working as a pastor, but I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a pivotal moment for me and how God put that calling on my life. And then a long winding path from then until now. But yeah, that's kind of how it started. So
cool.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you want to know about that or.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So at 17 was kind of you knew that was the direction you wanted to go. So going into college, you were kind of thinking, I want to be in ministry some way.
Yeah, and that was a real.
I just think like most people at that age don't really have that clarity yet. I certainly didn't.
Sure.
So it's kind of cool.
That was definitely an outpouring of God's grace on my life at that time period, because I grew up in the church. I grew up in a Christian home, and I actually sort of had the counter example when I went to college. You know, like you hear about a lot of kids, and there's unfortunately a lot of statistics to back this up.
Yep.
Kids that grow up in the church, kids that grow up in a youth group, and they get to college, or maybe not even college, they leave home, get to independence, and they sort of walk away from the church or walk away from their faith.
Yeah.
For me, it was kind of the opposite. I actually went into college like really excited. You know, I was excited about saying, hey, you know what? Like, I want to figure this out. Like, I want to figure out my relationship with God. I want to get invested. And so a big part of my story that I don't have to get into right now, but I got involved with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which is a college ministry. And there's a bunch of different ones. But InterVarsity was the one that I got plugged into. And that was really formative for me. That ministry really taught me a lot about discipleship, my own relationship with the Lord, how to have Christian relationships with other people, all kinds of stuff. So that was formative for me. But
yeah, I think we share that a bit, and that'll be part of my story too. But I have seen Christian ministries in college really impact a lot of people. Yeah, and I think it's looking at what you said. A lot of students go away to college and then they lose their faith. And why do they lose their faith? Well, it's because college is really hard. And you're hearing other voices from people that are academically very intelligent and, can be very persuasive. And it might be the first time you've ever heard a counter argument to anything you believe. But when Christians go, okay, we're going to go there and we're going to help people grow, like college ministries, some pretty cool things can happen. So.
Yeah. So I'm deeply thankful for that chapter of my story. Cool. But what about you, man? Like, sort of what kind of your story of calling and heading into ministry?
So I grew up in a Christian family too. My mom's father is a pastor, and he was pastor since he was very young. He didn't go to college. Well, he did go to college, but he started out not going to college. Then he was a teacher. Then he was a principal. Then he was a pastor. All before like 35, because things moved quicker.
Right.
But yeah, so I grew up surrounded by that. I grew up in a lot of different denominations, and I liked church. I think it was important to me. It really only became something I wanted to do in high school. I'd like joined the church band, and I was, finally found friends and stuff. But
wait, church band?
So like our youth group had a band.
Okay.
Yeah. It was pretty cool.
So you were the drummer?
No, bassist.
Oh.
Yeah. Then me and all the other kids. Well, there's 4 other guys that I was like were my best friends, and we also had like a hardcore metal band on the side too. So
no way.
Yeah, we spent all of our time together. We
Wait
were
a second.
We were either playing metal music or we were waking up Sunday morning at 6 a.m. to play Christian music.
Now, did you ever blend the two?
Yeah.
Metal Christian.
Of course.
Okay. All right. Folks, I can make no promises, but I'm promising I will dig up one of these songs.
No, you don't want to hear it.
We're going to play some of this music on a podcast someday.
I'm so thankful that my generation, just scraped by without this stuff being easily to record on TikTok and Instagram, because it's pretty much gone. When MySpace went down, we lost everything. It was a tragedy.
Oh man.
So that's when my faith was like, I don't even know. It was, I wanted to be at church and I wanted to be with Christians. Yeah. And so going into college, I actually did 2 years of community college, so I didn't leave. And then I did, after I graduated community college, I went to UCF, go Knights. And that was when I did what most people do. I fell away from the faith.
Sure.
There were a lot of hard things going on in my life. My parents separated. I was in a relationship that ended, and a lot of terrible things happened that really just made me angry. And the friends that I had made that weren't going to church weren't being a terrible influence on me, but they never encouraged me to go to church, so I just fell out of it. And I was also working full time. So it was like church was the easiest thing for me to cut off because it was just something I was doing. And so, when I got into the end of my junior year, I decided it was going to be something I needed to do again. I noticed there was something major missing in my life, and I went to Crew, which is another campus organization.
Yeah.
And then, I got super involved right away, played in the band, did sound stuff for them. And then by my senior year, I was actually president of the organization, because you needed a student body president. And so I was heavily involved. And I hated that role, by the way. Absolutely hated it.
Okay.
I had to attend all these board meetings and was not my thing at all.
Sure.
But I just said yes because, I say yes when people ask me for help. Don't take advantage of me if you're hearing this. I do like to help people, but something I need to work on.
Chris, will you please help me
find
a song from your high school metal band?
Nope. Okay. So anyway, moving on. I was going to school for speech pathology, which will come up again later. And when I graduated, I wasn't really sure that's what I wanted to do. So I kind of hung out for a couple years while I was, still serving the campus ministry. And that's when I felt called to go to seminary. And again, I didn't really want to be a pastor. I just knew that ministry was something I wanted to be in. So I got my degree in biblical studies thinking, hey, I can work in a church without having to be a pastor. And that's kind of how it started. And then I never wanted to preach. I hated the idea of being in front of people. And God just kept pushing me. So this is where we're at 5 years later.
Yeah. So just to clarify a little bit, that kind of initial calling, or however you want to phrase it, you felt like that was more specifically to go to seminary than it was to serve in a church per se, or?
No, it was more to serve in a church or church ministry, but it was more what I wanted to do. And I skipped part of this, but I guess my story is kind of complicated. So when I was at community college, I did an internship for a youth pastor, and it went very poorly. It was a good internship. I didn't do anything wrong. It went well, but my youth pastor got fired. And this all happened when I was the interning. And so he didn't do anything wrong. The church decided they didn't like him and they wanted somebody different, more dynamic in his role. And that really burned me. And so I didn't want anything else to do with church. And so at that point, I was like, oh, I want to be involved in church. I want to pastor, do whatever. Yeah. And then that burned me, and so I didn't want to. And so it was this kind of story of going back and forth of, I don't want to do this, but God's kind of calling me to it.
Okay.
And so, I knew that going into seminary, I wanted to be a part of changing, being a part of good, healthy leadership in a church.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily want to be the person up front speaking all the time,
yeah,
but I wanted to be a part of growth and proper biblical teaching, and a few other things that I got burned by from the church that was kind of like, hey, God's saying, if this is a problem to you, like why don't you be a part of the problem and fix it? And so that was kind of the energy going into it, but also God just kind of saying, hey, trust me, this is the next step for you. I know you don't know what's going to happen after this step, but this is the next step for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So kind of complicated, but that's how life is.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's cool to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool to hear that.
Yeah. So I'm sure we could talk about that for a long time.
Right.
But the next question that I think is really interesting is, what would you be doing if you weren't a pastor? What do you think what kind of job, or, would you be a stay-at-home dad?
Wow. Yeah, that's a tough question to answer. Just because, my relationship with the Lord is just so intertwined with all the decisions I make. It's hard to think about that in real concrete terms. I guess I would just say, just kind of the way I'm wired, I'm very relational. I'm a people person. I'm also big on teamwork. Like I love I love being part of a team to accomplish something.
Sure.
And a mixture of gifts and talents working together to reach a goal. That's really motivating for me and exciting. So I know that's all really vague. So I guess if I wasn't a pastor, it would have to be something where I was probably working on helping people get better in some way. Maybe it would be some kind of leadership development that isn't necessarily, church related.
Sure.
But something related to that, helping people become better leaders, figure out their own career path, something like that. Maybe I would end up in the college world, not necessarily the academic side, but working with college students as some kind of advisor or
counselor,
something like that.
I could see that.
So there'd been a time or two where I considered professional counseling, like going that route. But I quickly decided against that just because I'm so empathetic that I think it would be too hard to be a professional counselor all the time. I would have a hard time keeping that boundary up.
Yeah.
And I'd probably go home and cry every day. But anyway, so those are just a few random things. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah. I just, if you ever feel called to counseling, it's never too late. My mother-in-law got her degree in her 50s, and she's excellent at it. But so I mentioned I went to school for speech pathology, and I loved it. So I think that's probably where I would be, maybe in a school setting, helping kids. It's just really interesting to me. My sister's actually a certified speech language pathologist. And so, I mean, it's the same kind of thing, like helping people, encouraging people and helping people attain a goal. And, that's something where empathy can be an asset, helping people try to figure that stuff out. So, yeah, I think so. I worked as a manager at a nonprofit cafe that was really great too. So that kind of stuff, working with people and serving people, something I like to do.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So let me ask a question kind of on the opposite side.
Sure.
So we just talked about like what might we do if we weren't, working in a church as pastors. Let me ask sort of on the other side, since we are pastors, what are some of the challenges of that lifestyle, that job, that calling, or, what are some of the challenges you've encountered, some of the things that you think are hard about it that, every job has hard parts, right?
Absolutely.
But I don't know. Anybody that's watching or listening, maybe they wouldn't know as they think about what it's like to be a pastor.
Yeah, and this is something that I've been at two churches as a pastor, and so my my background isn't huge, but I do have two different experiences, and I think it varies dramatically depending on the church you're at.
Sure.
But work-life balance is really hard.
Sure.
There are going to be times as a pastor that you're going to be called to do something, and you have to do it.
Yeah.
So what that means is you have to be available and ready for that mentally and spiritually, but also your family has to be available and ready for that.
Yeah.
Like when you become a pastor, it's not just you, it's your whole family that has to be on board.
Yeah.
And so that's a tremendous honor to be able to serve people and love people, but it also means you're kind of on all the time.
Yeah.
And that's probably my second part, is that anybody you meet, as soon as they know who you are, I can't tell you how many times I've told somebody I'm a pastor after I've known them for like 30 minutes and like, oh, I'm sorry about my language earlier. I'm like, relax, it's okay.
Yeah.
But people change. People change how they're going to interact with you when they know you're a pastor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. Sometimes if I'm in a conversation with a complete stranger or maybe a new person that I'm trying to get to know, and I'm trying not to scare them off.
Yeah.
I won't say right away that I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
I'll say, oh, I do community development for a local nonprofit.
I haven't used that one. I've used I work at a church, but I haven't used that one before.
Yeah. Or I'll say, I teach on leadership principles. I'll say stuff like that.
That's awesome.
And sometimes that language helps keep that connection a little bit longer. And then, if it ends up being a friendship that goes beyond that, eventually, I'll say the word, I'm a pastor at a church. But
you'll reveal your trap card, and then they can.
But I mean, I relate to that. Like, it's a challenge sometimes because, we want to share the love of Christ with people.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that identity can be a barrier, and as soon as someone knows that you're a pastor, they are on guard,
mm-hmm.
they are more reserved, and they maybe treat you a little bit differently because of that.
Yeah.
And I guess that too would, and I guess I'm being super honest and vulnerable here. I think one of the challenges of being a pastor is sometimes it can be really lonely.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Just because, you are, well, maybe I shouldn't speak for anyone other than myself. In my experience, I'm trying to care and love for other people so well.
Mm-hmm.
Share Christ's love with people, sacrifice, serve people. And then, sometimes you get home and you're just drained and it's like, oh man, well, nobody's calling to check on me.
Yeah.
And that part of that is and I'm not trying to have a pity party here. That's not what I'm saying. That's just trying to be honest. And so part of our response as pastors is, one, we have to be intentional to find those relationships of support and encouragement, right? So we have to make sure that we're finding those relationships. And then to, supporting each other as best we can in ministry. And also, for all the folks that are listening that are not pastors or don't work at a church or don't, serve vocationally in Christian ministry.
Right.
I would just encourage you, like, if you have someone in your life that is in that kind of role, love on them. Like, love on them. Like, and not just the surface level stuff, Yes, we appreciate hearing on a Sunday morning, hey, you're doing a great job. That is encouraging. But, it can go so much deeper than that.
Sure.
So that would just be my little quick plug of advice to our listeners. But yeah, I think that's one of the challenges of being a pastor, being in ministry is sometimes it can be a little bit lonely because you're trying to serve other people. And especially in a world outside of the church where, hey, that's super nice, but it's not normal.
Sure.
Yeah.
So. And that also brings up a good point. Like being a pastor in the outside world, like when we walk out these doors, it's kind of like, I mean, for different reasons, but it's almost like being in law enforcement. There's a negative stigma for a lot of people with pastors.
Sure.
So as soon as you let somebody in on that, like you're dealing with a lot of stereotypes because of your job.
Yeah.
So that makes it lonely in itself because people already have, and for good reason, a lot of people have bad experiences with churches. So they hear that you're a pastor, now they're going to put you at arm's length.
Right.
So that person that might have been a good friend for you, they just can't be now.
Right.
So, or can be with healing. But yeah, I agree. It can be lonely. And I mean, there's also that, you're talking about vulnerability. There's also that tension of, how vulnerable can I be with somebody that I am pastoring? And so there's a lot that goes into that. But you're right. It is up to us to look for that community. And for anybody listening, same thing. It's up to you for you to look for community too on some level. The church can help. Like Mike and I can help each other, but it ultimately is up to us to find that community, and that's tough.
Yeah,
that's super tough.
So what about the other side of the coin then?
Yeah,
what do you think are some of your favorite parts about it?
Oh yeah.
I
mean, I love that I get to work for. Like every day I come into work, I get to do something that grows God's kingdom in one way, or be a part of growing God's kingdom in one way or another.
Yeah.
And, I don't always remember that, but like last week I got to pray with somebody that came and, needed some money, and, that kind of stuff just happens all the time. You're like in the prime spot to be available to people.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly exhausting. And I mean, you've bared a huge brunt of that during the whole Hurricane Ian thing, but it's also such an honor, to be able to represent God to people and love on people.
Yeah.
So like that is amazing. I also say like this isn't true for every church, but we have a lot of churches have, and we do have an incredible work culture. Like we have people that just love each other really well. And so during our staff meetings, we pray for each other. Can't do that at every job. Can't do that at hardly any job.
Right.
You know, we can pray for each other. We can talk about our faith openly. We can be vulnerable like we're being now.
Yeah.
You know, those are things that, you know, you just can't get anywhere else.
Right. Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, those are all great answers. I would echo those. I think too that one of the first things that jumps to mind for me is the joy that I get in just sort of being who God has created me to be. Mm-hmm. And that's actually sort of one of my kind of driving philosophies, if you will, driving missions in serving the church. And what I'm trying to say is like, I want everybody to be able to experience that.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't mean you have to be a pastor. You don't have to work in vocational Christian ministry to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I want everybody to have that joy of serving and giving and loving just as God created you to do those things.
Yep.
In whatever way that happens. And just, I guess, as a pastor working for a church, those opportunities may be afforded to me a little bit more directly and more often than maybe folks who are just in a secular marketplace job.
Sure, yeah.
You know, so just the opportunities that I get to talk to people, just ask them about their life, just like, hey, you know, I know this hard thing is going on. How are you doing? How can I pray for you? Praying for people. You know, those things are just extremely gratifying.
Yeah.
And just sometimes I don't even think much of it. And then a person will come back weeks or months later and just say, you know, this was so meaningful when you prayed for me or when we had this conversation. And that is really humbling because I didn't realize it was that meaningful in the moment. But those are the moments that I end up loving the most.
Yeah, I'd agree. I had one of those recently and I was just like, wow, God, you were doing some work that I had no idea you were doing.
Yeah.
You know, thanks for letting me be a part of that because I wasn't even aware it was going on.
Right.
But I'm gonna keep going with this thread a bit. So if somebody, we don't have a lot based on our demographics. I can't really tell how many people are listening or what age people are listening. But if somebody was thinking about doing vocational ministry, becoming a pastor, you know, what would you say to them? You know, if they were maybe saying coming out of high school like you at 17 or 18, what would you say to somebody that's thinking about becoming a pastor? Or maybe even later in life too, because a lot of people become ministers later.
Yeah, sure. Well, in every response like this, you know, there's going to be a measure of, I don't know what you call it, self-experience bias.
Yeah.
You know, so we're biased by the experience that we have had.
Yep.
So just acknowledging that up front. But I would say if there's anybody that's considering that, obviously be praying about it. Mm-hmm. You know, that's something that you want to have a strong and clear sense that the Lord is calling you to, you know? And so that would be the first thing is like praying about it and just ask the Lord, is this something that you want me to do? Is this something that you want me to give my time and energy and life to? And then if you feel like God is saying yes, if you feel like that's God's calling for you, then I would then take that, you know, that experience, that information, that prayer, whatever it is, I would take that to community and seek out confirmation and affirmation.
Absolutely.
You know, I didn't share this before, but, you know, when I was 17 and I really felt that strong sense, some of the first people I told were my parents. And when I told them, I was actually surprised at the time that they were not surprised.
Yeah.
So they were kind of like, oh, yeah, that's great. Like we've thought for a long time that maybe that would end up happening. And at 17, I was shocked that they said that. But it meant a lot that they affirmed it, and then also, of course, that they supported it,
Right.
as my parents. But even too, it was affirmed and confirmed by other people.
Yep.
I had a Sunday school teacher who had known me as a teenager, who kind of spoke into my life about some of my spiritual giftings. I had a pastor at that same church who I went and had a conversation with about, what does it mean if I think I have this calling? And so he kind of spoke encouragement over that and helped me think about some next steps. So I think having that community to confirm and affirm is a key part of it. So I could go on and on, I guess, but what do you think? What are some other things that people should be thinking about if they're considering ministry?
Yeah. I first want to echo what you said. I had the same experience, and that was a really important part of my decision to pursue ministry. I had people telling me that, they saw it in me and they affirmed that calling too. And so that's huge. At my point, I was at the end of college. So people I knew through college ministry were very supportive and everything. And that was wonderful. And parents were supportive. So yeah, I think, bringing it out to community that know you and love you is very important. And yeah, I would also say, like, especially if you're that young, what was your degree in college?
I got a very broad Bachelor of Arts in Communications degree.
I would just say, if you're exploring it and you're still opening that up to the Lord, don't feel like you need to go full in and get like a 4-year ministry degree.
Right.
It's totally normal to go to college. And actually, I would even say, I think I benefited a lot from going to a secular college and being in Christian ministry.
Sure.
Because it was kind of like that I get to apply what I'm learning directly.
Yeah.
So you can do both. And same thing. I know so many pastors. Pastor Tim's one that did something else before they were a pastor. So you don't have to jump right into it.
Right.
So share it with community and follow what God tells you to do. Absolutely. But
and I think that sort of self-discovery is a key part of it, right? God created you uniquely and specifically. He has gifted you in unique ways. And so part of figuring out your calling is making sure that you know what those gifts are, how God has made you to be the person that you are, and then allowing God to use those gifts and strengths for his kingdom.
Right.
Now, that's obviously true for everybody. You don't have to be in vocational ministry for that.
Absolutely.
But if you are thinking about vocational ministry, it's important to really think about those things. And even if you're older, think about your past jobs, your past experiences, how those have shaped you, and how they have made you into the person that you are today, and how that could prepare you for a particular kind of ministry as you try to figure out what those steps are.
Absolutely. The character that always comes to mind talking about this kind of thing is Paul, right? Somebody that came to faith later in life, but was an excellent missionary that was a tent maker.
Yeah.
That was his job.
Yeah.
But he was still the best missionary to have ever lived.
Right.
So it doesn't have to look the same as somebody else. Your journey, like you said, is going to be unique and specific. So
yeah.
So but I hope all that non-information helped anybody that's curious.
Yeah. So, all right, I think we probably got time for maybe one more.
Maybe one more, if we go quick, I think.
Yeah. So I guess maybe a question, it's hard to answer this briefly, but let me ask, do you have any books or resources that you would recommend because this kind of goes off what we've been already talking about, books or resources or advice you would recommend for people maybe just trying to figure this out, even if it's not a calling to ministry?
Sure.
Somebody who's just trying to figure out, who am I? How am I gifted? How can I serve God's kingdom? And regardless of how old, our listeners are, whether you're way up there or still so young, just any thoughts on that? What could we recommend to people as they're trying to figure out their calling, their story, where they want to end up?
Sure. Yeah. So one really easy one is a book called The Call by Guinness. That's OZ or OS. I can't remember. You'll find it. There's not there's not many people named Oz, but it's a great book, and it's all about the fact that all Christians have the same primary calling. We're all called to spread the gospel and to spread the love of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And the way your secondary calling, or what your secondary calling is, the way that God gifted you specifically to do that.
Yeah.
So that could be pastoring, that could be being a speech pathologist or a counselor or whatever. But our primary calling is the same. And it's a very good read. I read it in seminary, and it's not seminary level reading, but it's very good for anybody to read, because we're all doing the same thing. We're just doing it in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the second thing, I just want to put out there as a resource, if you're interested in growing your biblical knowledge to just do ministry better with wherever you are, obviously you can read the Bible, but I also really love the Bible Project. They have online videos, they have curriculum, they have amazing stuff, like incredible content. Just search the Bible Project on YouTube or in your browser, and that's a great way to just there's a lot of resources out there, but that's a great way to just grow your knowledge where you're at and improve whatever ministry you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you? What would you recommend?
Yeah. As soon as I asked a question, I realized I couldn't remember my own answers. I have to go look at my bookshelf.
Sure. We can put them in the show notes.
Yeah. I'll have to go and look, because I can't remember right now. But yeah, certainly there's a variety of books out there about figuring out your own calling and strengths. I would say, again, this might be kind of common knowledge, but there's a variety of assessments out there that you can take.
Yeah.
Christian ones that are based on, sort of personality profiles and your strengths.
That's a good point.
The Strength Finders is one of them, where it's helping you identify your top 5 strengths and how you can utilize those strengths in whatever kind of work and life you're living. There's spiritual gift assessments. Obviously you got to research a little bit. Some of them are a little more trustworthy than others, but there's things like that you can use too to kind of help you think about your own giftings, and then see, and again, you take that stuff to community.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I took this assessment and here's the results it gave me. Does this make sense to you? Do you think this is right? And, see what people say. And then figuring out how can you use those things for God's kingdom. So.
Yeah, that's really good. And I would even say one more thing, hey, take your pastor out for a cup of coffee,
Yeah.
Just ask them about their job.
Right.
If you were going to get a job anywhere else, that's a great place to start, right?
Sure.
Take somebody out and just, ask them about their job and see if it seems good to you. But I think most pastors would be more than willing to mentor or, help you along that process. So
yeah.
We had a lot more questions. So if this was interesting to you guys, let us know. You can even ask us any questions you want. You can email at us, ctimpson@astero.church. It's a great way to get a hold of us.
Yeah.
Or the church email, or you can reply on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. So if you guys like this, let us know. But either way, we're gonna have something else coming out next week. So.
Yeah, that's right. And I have one more question.
Okay.
When are we gonna give the people?
It's not gonna happen.
The recording of your metal band.
That's a great place to end it. I really appreciate you bringing that up, Mike. Maybe we'll see what happens in a few months.
Okay. Well, I think God might be calling you to release an album.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to go to community with that. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
All right. Thanks, everybody.